Black waitress fed 2 orphans. 20 years later, a helicopter showed up in front of his house. A black waitress fed 2 orphans, and 20 years later, a helicopter appeared in front of her house. The noise of the propellers cut through the morning silence like a razor. Adana, 45 years old, was washing dishes in the sink of her small house when the whole neighborhood stopped to look at the black helicopter landing right in front of her gate. 2 elegant figures stepped out of the aircraft. A tall man in an impeccable suit and a woman of noble bearing, both walking directly toward her door. Adana dried her hands slowly, a serene expression taking over her face, as if she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. 20 years earlier, Adana was just another black waitress trying to survive at the Golden Fork, a fine dining establishment where customers barely looked at her face when placing their orders. At that time, she was 25 years old and working double shifts, mornings as a janitor, afternoons and evenings as a waitress to support her sick mother. It was on a cold December night that it all began. 2 orphan children, a 10-year-old boy and an 8-year-old girl, appeared shivering at the back door of the restaurant. Eli and Nina, she would later learn, had lost their parents in an accident and had been living on the streets for weeks. Adana did something that would change their lives forever. She began sneaking food to them every night. The restaurant manager, Robert Manning, a 50-year-old white man with a superiority complex, discovered Adana's charity after 3 weeks. "Do you think this is a free food distribution center?" he shouted, firing Adana in front of all the employees. "You clueless black woman, you should be grateful you have a job, not giving our food to bums." Adana left silently, but continued to feed the children with what little she had at home. Until one day they simply disappeared, taken away by social services to a distant institution. Now 20 years later, as she watched those 2 elegant figures approaching, Adana allowed herself a smile. During all those years working in modest jobs, being underestimated and humiliated, she kept a secret that no one could have imagined. If you're wondering what 2 orphan street children have to do with a helicopter landing at the door of a former waitress, get ready to discover how small acts of kindness can create twists and turns that no one can predict. The humiliation at the Golden Fork was just the beginning. Robert Manning wasn't satisfied with firing Adana. He made sure to spread the word around town that the problem waitress had been caught stealing food. Strategic phone calls to other restaurants ensured that Adana was blacklisted from any decent establishment. "You have to understand one thing about people like her," Manning explained to the other owners over lunch at the private club. "Give them an inch and they'll take a mile. I thought I was doing charity by hiring a black woman, but they always show their true colors." Meanwhile, Adana scoured the city for any job. Car washes, flyer delivery, cleaning offices in the wee hours of the morning. Anything that paid a few dollars. Her mother, Mrs. Ruth, watched her daughter come home later and later, her clothes dirty and her pride bruised. "My daughter," she whispered as she tended to her bandages, "diabetic for years. She depended on Adana for everything. You have so much more inside you than this town can see." And she was right. What Manning and the others didn't know was that Adana had graduated from the state university with a degree in business administration with top marks. She worked as a waitress not because she had no other options, but because she needed flexible hours to take care of her mother. 4 years, she kept her diploma in a drawer, accepting that the world saw her as just another disposable employee. But the children changed something inside her. Even after she was fired, even when she was hungry at times, Adana continued to bring food to Eli and Nina. She sold personal belongings, took humiliating extra jobs, anything to make sure those 2 little ones didn't go to bed hungry. It was on one of those nights carrying a bag of leftovers from a wedding she had helped clean up that Adana heard familiar voices coming from the private club. Manning was on the porch with other businessmen drinking whiskey and laughing loudly. "Did you see that? The thief waitress is still out there picking up scraps like a stray dog." Manning laughed, pointing in the direction Adana was walking. "I bet she's selling the stolen food to buy drugs. It's always the same story with these types." Adana stopped. For a moment, she felt her blood boil. She could cross the street, climb those marble steps, and show those men exactly who she really was. She could pull her diploma out of her pocket, and rub it in each of their faces. But then she thought of Eli and Nina, probably waiting for her in the cold alley. She took a deep breath, adjusted the bag of food on her shoulder, and kept walking. Manning and his friends laughed even louder, interpreting her silence as submission. They had no idea what a mistake they were making. That same night, after feeding the children, Adana sat down in the small room she shared with her mother and opened an old notebook. She began to write names, dates, conversations she had overheard at the Golden Fork. During months of waiting tables, she had absorbed valuable information about business, tax schemes, even some racist comments that customers made thinking she was invisible. One day, she muttered to herself, "You'll find out you underestimated the wrong person." 3 weeks later, Eli and Nina simply disappeared. Adana searched everywhere until she found out they had been taken to an orphanage in another state. She tried to visit them, but was barred. No relatives, no visitation rights. That was the last straw. Adana realized that dreaming of justice wasn't enough. She had to build it with her own hands. What those privileged men couldn't see was that every insult, every closed door, every denied opportunity was forging something far more dangerous than a disgruntled waitress. It was creating a strategist who knew their weaknesses better than they knew themselves, and who now had every motivation in the world to use that knowledge against them. Over the next 2 years, while Manning celebrated his victory over the problem waitress, Adana was building something none of them could have imagined. Working 16 hours a day at jobs that barely paid the rent, she used every free minute to put everything she had learned in college into practice. The notebook turned into detailed spreadsheets. The conversations she had overheard at the Golden Fork revealed a disturbing pattern. Manning and his club friends weren't just racist. They were habitual tax evaders. Decades of overpriced contracts, off-the-books employees, manipulated receipts. Adana had names, dates, exact amounts. Her mother died on a rainy Tuesday, holding her daughter's hand and whispering, "Don't let the anger consume you, girl. Use this pain to build something greater." Adana promised her right there in the public hospital bed where they had waited 6 hours for treatment, that she would do just that. It was at Mrs. Ruth's funeral that Adana met Dr. Marcus Chun, a tax lawyer who had been a college classmate of Adana's mother decades earlier. Chun was the son of Chinese immigrants and knew well the bitter taste of prejudice disguised as professional standards. "Your mother spoke of you," Chun said, handing her his card. "She said you had the potential for great things, but that the world was trying to convince you otherwise." Adana showed Chun her notes. The lawyer leafed through the pages silently, his eyes widening with each revelation. "This is a tax bomb," he muttered. "If half of this information is true, it's all true," Adana interrupted. "I was there when they said it. They thought I was furniture." Chun closed the notebook slowly. "You have 2 options. Hand this over to the IRS and hope they investigate. Or we build a case so solid they have no choice but to act." Meanwhile, Manning had expanded his business. He bought 2 competing restaurants, always following the same pattern, mostly white employees in prominent positions, minimum wages for the others, contracts that existed only on paper. His arrogance grew in proportion to the size of his bank account. "Did you see that the thief waitress became a janitor?" Manning laughed during a business lunch. "Karma works. People like that need to know their place in the world." What Manning didn't know was that the janitor now cleaned the building where his accounting office was located 3 times a week, and that during those months, Adana had photographed hundreds of documents, copied entire spreadsheets, and recorded compromising conversations through the thin walls. Chun was impressed with Adana's methodology. "You should have been a detective," he joked, organizing the evidence into themed folders. "This is professional investigative work." "I had good teachers," Adana replied, remembering the scientific methodology classes she had taken seriously in college. "The difference is that now I have personal motivation." The turning point came when Adana discovered that Manning was planning an even bigger expansion, a chain of restaurants financed by international investors. The project depended on a flawless public image and strict government certifications. "It's now or never," Chun said, tapping his fingers on the desk in his small office. "If we let him close those deals, he'll be too protected to attack. Adana looked out the office window, watching the movement of the city that had so underestimated her. At that moment, she no longer felt like the humiliated waitress of 2 years ago. I felt like the strategist I had always been beneath the surface. He believes he destroyed me, she said, turning to Chun with a smile that mixed determination and a hint of righteous vengeance. He has no idea that he just gave me time to prepare properly. Chun nodded, recognizing in his partner's eyes the same hunger for justice that had motivated him throughout his career. Then it's time to show him who really knows how to play this game. The plan was ready. The evidence was organized. The right contacts had been identified. Adana took a deep breath, remembering her mother's words about turning pain into building. Manning had completely underestimated the power of a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. For months, everyone saw only a quiet janitor cleaning offices. What they didn't realize was that they were watching a strategist gathering ammunition for a war Manning didn't even know was about to begin. The first crack in Manning's confidence appeared on a Tuesday in March when his chief accountant called in a panic. "Mr. Manning, there's an IRS audit here. They're asking for documents from the last 5 years." Manning laughed, adjusting his Italian tie as he watched the city from his 20th floor office window. "Routine, Peterson. We're a solid company. Show them our books." "Sir, they're not asking for the official books. They have copies of documents I've never seen. Detailed spreadsheets, payment records that shouldn't exist." Manning's smile froze. "What do you mean they shouldn't exist?" Across town, Adana was in her small apartment watching the morning news when her phone rang. "It started," Chun said simply. "The IRS accepted our complaint and acted faster than we expected. They're going after everything, Adana. 5 years of chronologically organized evidence." Adana closed her eyes for a moment, remembering her mother. "She would be proud," she murmured. "But that's just the beginning." The Department of Justice has also been notified, and the Health Department has received an interesting dossier on working conditions in Manning's restaurants. The second crack came 2 days later. Manning was meeting with the international investors who would finance his expansion when his assistant rushed into the conference room in a panic. "Mr. Manning, there are journalists at the reception desk. They're asking about allegations of slave labor and tax evasion. The local newspaper is going to publish a story tomorrow." The CEO of the investors, a strict German named Herr Schmidt, frowned. "What is this, Manning? Our company does not associate with questionable operations." "It's a misunderstanding," Manning stammered, feeling sweat trickle down his back. "A disgruntled former employee. Probably you know how it is." But when the newspaper came out the next day, there was no misunderstanding. The front page story featured photos, documents, and detailed testimonials. The headline was devastating. "Food empire built on exploitation and tax evasion. The truth behind Manning's restaurants." The report revealed everything. Black employees being paid half the salary of white employees for the same jobs. Degrading working conditions. Elaborate tax evasion schemes. But what was most shocking was a recording obtained by an anonymous source in which Manning was clearly heard saying, "Negroes have to know their place. I pay the minimum wage because that's all they deserve." Manning called the newspaper in a rage. "Where did you get this? It's a setup. This is persecution." "Mr. Manning," the reporter replied calmly. "We have dozens of hours of recordings, hundreds of documents, and testimony from 42 former employees. Would you like to comment?" The third crack destroyed everything. Investors canceled the contract immediately. The bank froze the company's accounts. 3 of the restaurants had their licenses suspended by the health department. Employees began suing the company en masse. It was during an emergency meeting with his lawyers in a conference room that now looked like an interrogation chamber that Manning received the call that would change everything. "Hello. Who is this?" "Hi, boss." The voice was calm, polite, with a slight tone of irony that Manning couldn't immediately identify. Who is this? Adana. Remember me. The waitress you fired 3 years ago for feeding orphan children.